Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you are a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, and fully funded Great Commission worker. Today, my guest is a friend of mine that I'm not going to use his name because we're in a closed country. But hey, man, thanks for being here today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. We've had a great week hanging out together, doing a boot camp here in this closed country here in East Asia.
Yeah, it's been a good time. I had a chance to get to know you pretty well and get to know your family, and definitely be able to serve a bunch of East Asians. And yeah, I mean, it's been a great week, but also I've been able to hear more about support raising from your perspective. So let's just jump in and give a little bit of history. I know you need to leave out some specific names and dates and stuff like that, but tell us a little bit about your history and a little bit more about what you do and how long you've been doing it. And yeah, just kind of open up with us a little bit, if you would.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been in vocational ministry now for 24 years, and that's about 22 years longer than I thought it would be. After my initial 2-year commitment, I had joined a large campus-based organization 24 years ago, straight out of college, and I told God I'd do it for 2 years. And
because then you were going to go get a real job, right?
That's right. I was going to go be an electrical engineer. Okay. That was my major. And economics. I added a second major so I wouldn't be a double E, because it takes a double E to spell geek. So I'd be a triple E. So yeah, I thought I'd go back into the engineering world or business school or law school or something like that. And that was 24 years ago.
Well, let's start right there. Before we jump too far forward. What was it that captured your heart and even helped you realize at one point that this ministry gig you were doing for a couple of years was actually a vocational call that would probably last the rest of your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. Probably, let's think about that. There are probably a lot of factors. Mm-hmm. I think one thing was just realizing that ministry is a high calling, and that ministry, pardon me if I'm offending anybody, ministry is not just for the college dropouts and those who had 2.0 GPAs.
Mm-hmm. You just offended me. Carry on.
Yeah, well, that's my goal here. But we're still friends. But there's a place in ministry for those that did well in school, and could have easily gotten 6-figure jobs, and not that God needs those people. God doesn't need anybody, but he chooses to use people like that, just as he chooses to use everybody. And so just really began to see a lot of fruit in the ministry that he called me to, and years turned into decades, and here we are. Wow. And before long, I just realized that it was most likely going to be a career assignment for me.
Yeah. Well, I know early on you had to raise some support. I also know that you got married and then you had to raise more support. And so you must have had some pretty good examples early on that kind of challenged you to be fully funded. Was that ever a big issue for you on the funding side, or did you always have some good coaching or good training, or tell me a little bit specifically about that?
Yeah, actually, it was an issue for me early on, and I did have good coaching and good training through the large organization that I was a part of previously.
Okay,
some of the best out there. Mm-hmm. But I think when I raised support initially before I got married, I think I was lazy and just didn't go as fast as I could. I wasn't as disciplined. I didn't have as many appointments as I should have, as I could have, as the expectations were.
Okay.
And guess what happened after 3 years? Now, I was single at the time, but 3 years in, my account balance was getting lower and lower and lower and approaching zero. By God's grace, I never received a short paycheck, but I think there may have been a couple months where I didn't reimburse my full expenses. And again, by God's grace, I wasn't running any credit card debt, but I was kind of right there on the threshold. And for me, what kind of turned that around and kicked me into gear was getting married. I realized now I've got somebody else to provide for, and I just developed a new outlook on support. And again, God provided graciously and generously, and we've been fully funded really as long as we've been married, so going on 21 years.
Okay. All right. Now, I know you guys have kids, and as best I can tell, they all eat on a regular basis. So this full funding thing, it hasn't been just for the ministry work you do. It's also been for your family as well. So one of the things that we talk about when we're defining being fully funded as Support Raising Solutions, I direct Support Raising Solutions. I should probably be able to get the name right. But anyway, one of the things we frequently talk about is that a good definition, we believe, is that you have enough to maximize the fruitfulness of your family and your ministry, not or your ministry. But I know that you lived overseas a couple different times for extended periods, and you haven't always seen that to be the case with some of the people you've been able to interact with other missionaries, basically. You've definitely seen some kind of sad situations where they showed up on the field, they didn't have their funding in order, and probably in many cases they didn't last. Tell me a little bit about some of what you've observed, and obviously you're going to leave the names out to let people keep their privacy, but I'm sure it's hard for you guys and discouraging for you guys at times to see that happening. Yeah,
well, I'll give you one example from our life, and then maybe some kind of on the flip side.
Yeah.
When we were raising support to move back to this large country 4.5 years ago, we decided that we wanted to send our kids to the international school.
Okay.
And we investigated what the finances would look like for that, and thankfully there was a generous missionary discount. But even with that missionary discount, for our 3 children, it's about $25,000 a year. And so we trusted the Lord, stepped out in faith, and raised that additional amount on a yearly basis. So it's already built into our monthly goals.
Okay.
And some people look at that and say, well, that's just...
You're wasting money.
You're wasting money. Why can't you homeschool?
Right.
Nothing against homeschoolers. I have a lot of respect for them.
Sure.
Not sure that we're a homeschool family ourselves. I think our kids might not receive that too well. But the way that we look at that is, $25,000, that's really the cost of getting an extra labor on the field, because that's what allows my wife to be much more fully engaged in ministry. Whereas if she was home during the day, $25,000, I see that as a small price to pay for one more labor on the field.
That's a good perspective.
In contrast, I've seen families that have moved around the world and have opted not to do that. And again, nothing wrong with not using private or international education.
Sure.
But I think especially when you move overseas, you're out of your comfort zone. You don't speak the local language. You don't have any community. And the local schools, because of those same reasons, aren't maybe the best option for your kids' education.
Right. But
it can be very pricey, especially if you have 4, 5, 6 kids. You may be looking at a $40,000, $50,000 a year tuition bill.
Yeah.
So I've seen some families that have just kind of written that off just because of the amount. And I'm not blaming it entirely on that, but a year in, they lack community. Their kids are maybe not being challenged, or they're bored, things like that. And I think that was an opportunity that they could have used to thrive in their setting.
Right. I think sometimes it's hard for people to understand all the extra little costs that do go on in living internationally, particularly in a missional way. Tell me a little bit more about that, because I know that we can have a very wide and very varied audience as far as who's listening to this. You don't have to share all the actual numbers, but I know there are many little different costs and expenses that kick in to serve in the way that you guys do. Share a little bit about what those are that might not be normal for some of the, at least for some of the Americans that would be listening.
Yeah, well, within our ministry, we're a global ministry. We're also a fairly small ministry, and so we tend to do things often with people on other teams in other parts of the world, and the only way to get together with them, aside from video calls, and we do utilize those quite a lot, gotten to be very proficient on Zoom, but we are on airplanes quite a lot. And so I can't even count the number of international trips I've taken in the last 12 months, but we're in Dubai and we're in Southeast Asia and Africa.
And these are not vacations.
No,
not even close.
No, not at all. But we tell our new staff, we encourage them, build into your budget, build into even your recurring monthly budget, a set amount for conferences and for travel, things that we can predict. But again, when you're a small organization like ours is, that's constantly evolving, sometimes you don't really know what's going to be happening 12 months from now.
Okay, so you said small organization a couple of times. That's fine. Give a range of what you consider to be a small organization. Some people, they're thinking 3. Some people might be thinking 2,000 as small. So
sure.
Give a ballpark range for us.
Well, given that I used to serve with an organization that was 10,000 plus.
Okay.
Now, the 100 that we are now seems like a small organization.
Okay. All right.
So about 100 people.
Yeah. That's fair. Okay.
Yeah. So I often get asked by my director to go to this part of the world or that part of the world. And I could say, hey, you didn't tell me about that. That wasn't built in last year to my support goals. I didn't know about that trip.
I'm not going unless you buy the ticket for me.
Yeah, are you going to pay? And so I've been able to go to some of these unplanned meetings, actually to all of these unplanned meetings. And in some cases, well, actually in most cases, I don't even ask who's paying for the tickets. The Lord's blessed us with some surplus. And so I just reimburse that directly from my personal account. Probably if I were to ask my director, he'd probably pay for it. But I haven't even asked. I don't want to be a burden to him in some of those cases.
And those were funds that were given for the express purpose of ministry. So
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
If you love to read, we have an entire blog article archive on support raising, from biblical encouragement to practical tips, to stories and personal experiences. Meanwhile, there's different articles that are more along the lines of shaping culture, elevating training, and building infrastructure so that you can multiply your coaching within your missions organization. Either way, you might want to go check out some of our articles at supportraisingsolutions.org/blog.
Well, I know that sometimes, I'd say not even sometimes, lately, one of the most frequent questions that I have been receiving has been along the lines of, what do you do when you're living off support and you're going to head home soon, or you do head home soon, and whether the term is furlough or whatever else, and you're trying to raise more support, and then the opposite's happening. You come back for 6 months and people think, oh, well, they're not in Asia anymore. Let's stop supporting them, or they're doing something different. Or maybe some people don't even communicate. They just stop giving when they find out that you weren't in Asia nonstop. That probably hasn't been your perspective exactly, and yet I know I've received several questions like that recently. In fact, I even have some friends who, and I'm imagining what caused this, but when they went back to the States, their hope was to raise more support, and they actually lost a lot of support, and it really kind of sent them reeling. And they were also from a different country in the Asia area. So kind of unpack what to do, what the plan is, and how to even avoid those type of situations. Because I trust, I've spoken with you enough, and I trust your wisdom and your perspective enough to know that you know that doesn't happen in like one isolated little incident. There were a number of things that most likely led to those leaders losing people off their team.
Yeah, great question. I've experienced that. Like you mentioned, this is now our second time living in East Asia. And our first time after we moved back to the States, we lost some support. One family directly told us that they wanted to pull that because we were no longer living internationally. And of course, what they didn't realize that was by moving back to the States, our costs actually had risen. So we were losing support right at a time when our costs were going up. But yeah, I'd like to refer to it. You mentioned furlough. Well, and I will say we may not have experienced exactly what you're talking about, because taking furloughs in the States is not restful for us. And so we're even looking for ways, perhaps even this summer, where that we can take a furlough in Asia, just in a different country for a month or so, and get off the grid. But even not using the word furlough, I think a lot of supporters maybe equate the word furlough with vacation, or you're just going to the beach, kicking back, doing nothing for 6 months or whatever it is. And even if your agency's policy allows you to kick back and do nothing for 6 months, I think that's totally legitimate. I think it's how you portray that to your supporters. And so one thing would be using the term home assignment instead of furlough. The idea that your HR director or your boss or whatever has actually assigned you to be back in your passport country for a certain period of time.
Right.
Perhaps you're attending conferences, or maybe you're raising more support, or maybe you are still working. Of course, today, a lot of missionaries are able to do the same work over computers and email and the internet, whether back in the States or internationally. And so their ministry may be unaffected, and so they may be just as productive in the mountains of Colorado as they are in Asia.
Right.
So that would be one thing.
Right. So sometimes I hear of missionaries that it seems like the longer they're on the field, the more they are losing people from their support team, even though they're doing the work that they set out to do. And then also, I've been hearing more, a couple of times recently, I've actually heard of missionary families that they come home on whatever assignment it is, whether they're supposed to be there on rest or maybe they are supposed to, maybe they've been given the word furlough or something else, and they think, oh, this is great, we're going to see people, and they're going to increase their support, and they find the opposite happening. I imagine you've had some experience and some perspective on all of that. What's commonly behind that, or what would you address people that have that concern?
Well, one thing to speak to what you just said a moment ago is even just using the word and the mentality of furlough. Really, what I would encourage people to do is to come at it from a different perspective and use the term something like home assignment. I think a lot of times supporters hear the word furlough and they equate that with vacation. I'm just coming back to my home country for 6 months to do nothing and just relax at the beach or something like that. And even if your agency's HR guidelines allow you to do that, I think it's all in the matter of how you package that and present that, and it's really how you communicate with your supporters. But I think in terms of losing support when you come back, or even losing support before you come back, just support dropping off your team, I think so much of that really gets back to poor support habits that you develop overseas. I've seen so many prayer letters, and I want to take blame as well. I've been guilty of writing many prayer letters that are just so deep into the weeds. They forget the vision, and there's pictures in there, and there's stories that really aren't connected well.
Lots of details that don't actually make sense.
That's right. And so I have to remind myself that my supporters need to hear the vision. And I'm talking about the big picture vision of why I came here in the first place, why they started supporting me in the first place, time and time and time again, perhaps even every single newsletter. I like to tell a story that relates to that and that even spells it out very clearly. And then every couple newsletters, I'll just bring them back to, maybe package it in a different way, remind them of what the vision is, even with all of that. And I feel like I do a fairly good job at that. I'll go back to some of my home churches in the States, and I'll have supporters come up to me and they will have the wrong agency name.
Sure. Oh yeah.
They'll have the wrong mission completely. Even
they forget which side of the world you're on.
That's right. Even senior pastors.
You're in South America, right?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. No habla español. Even senior pastors and sometimes mission pastors whose job it is to get this right, they put us in the wrong category and they don't understand what we're doing. And so I'm thinking, even if the professionals like this are misunderstanding, then that is just incumbent on me as the worker to do a great job to over communicate with them. And I think now, this certainly wasn't the case 20, 30, 50 years ago. Back then, you really could claim the excuse that I'm on the other side of the world and it's too difficult to communicate. Maybe if you're in a closed country, you can't send physical letters and things like that. But nowadays, with the internet and with voice over IP and texting and Zoom and Skype and all of that, and of course, even in a closed country, everything that we're doing here requires creative communication and creative access. And so with a VPN, it's exactly the same as if we're back in the States. And so there's no excuse. unless a supporter, and I do have a supporter like this, 93-year-old, dear faithful woman who doesn't have an email address and doesn't surf the web. And so for her, maybe I do have to send letters.
Right.
But even there, you can have them hand delivered out of country every couple months when somebody's on their way back. So there's really no excuse.
And really, what you're describing, there's a term for that we use, and it's vision-driven communication.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot you could say. There's a lot you probably don't need to say. Sometimes people just feel like, I don't know, I'll just kind of say anything. And we really want to draw people back to the middle of talk about your vision, talk about what you've done recently, and talk about what you're doing now and for the future that are connected to your vision. Don't just give random details, because the random details, that almost uninspires people from paying attention to your newsletters or your social media or whatever else it is that you put out there. Mm-hmm. I know also that you brought up another real sharp thing there, and that was about when you're coming home and connecting with people. That's huge. I know I've heard of situations where there's never that face to face. People just want their supporters to just read the newsletter, and there's not like really relationship building going on. So when you come home and you've talked to a sending church or something like that, it sounds like you get the opportunity. You're actually trying to get in front of that missions pastor or that missions committee member and build a relationship, right?
Oh, absolutely. I like to get in front of whoever the gatekeepers are at that church or in that community. It could be the senior pastor, it could be the executive pastor, it could be the mission pastor, it could be one of the elders or one of the deacons or whoever that person might be. But it doesn't even have to be somebody who has the title. We have a supporter at a couple at one of our supporting churches, and they no longer have a title of any kind. Mm-hmm. They're not Sunday school leaders or anything, but they're influencers, mm-hmm. and they're wooers. And this one couple that I have in mind has helped us to host a number of support dinners and small group gatherings where they invite existing and potential new supporters to their home, and they cook dinner and they bring us in, show a video, and we cast a vision for what we're doing.
Right.
And probably over about a 12-year period, that one family has been responsible for raising up probably $1,500 a month.
Wow.
Just from their connections.
Wow. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but I had something similar where somebody's already on my team. They're already an advocate for what I was doing, meaning they were telling others, trying to connect others to our ministry. And in the midst of kind of serving me, helping me, they had an aha moment like, oh, wow, you're doing that too. And okay, now I understand why you're doing this. And you're just like, I thought you knew that. And that was a person that was really well connected.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. We had, again, this very same couple came to our country a couple years ago on a short-term trip that we had led, and we invited them to come. And we were meeting students on campus to prepare for an evangelistic party later in the week. And I remember this guy, we'll call him Bob. Bob looked at us and said, "Wow, this missionary work that you guys do, this is hard work." It just finally dawned on him after supporting us for probably 15 years.
Wow.
And he was in the ministry. He was an advocate. He was raising up other support for us. He didn't realize how hard we were working and how much of a spiritual battle it really is.
Yeah. Well, I just want to swing back to where you are here on the other side of the world, and from at least from probably what most people who are listening to this podcast are from, and just kind of focus once again as far as just good principles, good practices. So here you are, fully funded, have been for years. You remain fully funded, partially because you have good habits in ministry, but you're in a closed country where communication is an issue. You have to be very careful about what you communicate it, how you communicate it, when you communicate it at times. And so you've really kind of removed any doubt from my mind that somebody can't live in a closed country, or if they're living in a closed country, that they can't really maintain their support. You guys are doing well. You don't strike me as living lavishly at all, but also you don't seem like you're in the poorhouse. You're really you seem to be doing very well. So what are some best habits? What are some things that you have learned, some nuggets of wisdom that you can share with others that maybe they're on the field themselves right now, or maybe they're headed to the field and they're concerned, how am I supposed to maintain my relationship with my supporters? How am I supposed to keep the prayers being prayed and the giving being gifted?
Yeah, that's great. I don't have all the easy answers, and I haven't always succeeded in that. We've failed a lot and have learned along the way. But using technology certainly is a great way, like I mentioned a second ago, taking advantage of phone calls and texting and emails and frequent prayer letters, both email prayer letters. And I'll say we're still a little bit old school. We still send out a hard copy newsletter every month or so.
Okay.
And
I'm assuming you use the service back in the States?
Sometimes we do.
Okay.
We actually have a church in Florida that is not able to support us financially, but the church receptionist there is so gracious with her time, and the church approves of her doing this, using their resources.
Oh, that's fantastic.
I send her a PDF every month of the letter. She prints it out, and we use those post office, those pre-stamped envelopes from the U.S. Post Office with a return address, and she just does the labels and.
So you built a little your own little mail sending system even though you're definitely far away. Very cool.
That's great. To me, it's a great example of one thing that we talk about in mobilization ministry, which is being a sender, which doesn't only involve financial support, even though that's a big part of it. But this woman in Florida is definitely a sender.
Okay.
She enables us to do that.
Okay.
So we have made a priority to get things in people's mailboxes as well as their email inboxes frequently throughout the year. We try to send out in addition to regular prayer letters, we'll send out about every 18 months or so, we'll do a family picture on a magnet.
Okay.
And we've used one of those companies that has probably advertised in the support raising circles, and it's not cheap.
No.
We've sent out.
They don't give those things away.
No, I think it's about $400, $400 or $500 every time we do a big bulk order.
Yeah.
And
you guys get a professional photo done too. It's not a selfie you did with an iPhone 5. And all three of your kids, or iPhone 6 or whatever. We're up to the 10 now at the time we're recording
this.
Right. So
yeah, iPhone 10 maybe you could. Yeah, no, exactly. That's what we do.
Yeah,
that's right. And I'm amazed. Or I shouldn't be amazed now, but every time we go back to our supporters' homes, and of course that's another point, is you go back to the States on a home assignment or you're at a conference or whatever, and you connect with people, and I'm amazed at how many homes I go into, and I would say probably 9 times out of 10, I'm in their kitchen, I look at their refrigerator, and there's our magnet. And sometimes in the past, we've gotten a little stingy and we haven't done the magnet. We've just done a photo. You go to Walmart and you just do the 6-cent photo, whatever. Right. And those don't make it to people's refrigerators.
Yeah, no, that's frequently.
But when you invest the extra $1, they're there. And I think
$1's worth a lot. That's right. Context.
Every time they go get a glass of milk or something like that from their fridge, there we are. Yeah. And I don't know if they're reminded to pray.
Kind of spooky if you think about it.
They associate us with milk now, right?
Yeah. Hey, I want to back up something you said about calls and texts and emails. We're not saying where you're at in the world, but it's safe to say you're around, depending where your supporter lives, you're around 12 time zones away. Could be 1 or 2 less, could be 1 or 2 more. But how do you manage that? I mean, because what I have had people actually tell me is, well, I can't do that. I live far away. And yeah, you just rolled your eyes when I said that, because you and I both know that, yeah, you kind of manage that. So what would you tell the person who's thinking, I can't do that. I only like to make my phone calls between 12 and 2 during my day, so I'm just not calling anybody or whatever else. Be nice, but speak some maturity into them, please.
Right. Well, it's certainly true that time zone can be a pain. And if you're expecting real-time communication, sometimes that doesn't happen very well. If you send a text message, you may not get a response back for 8 hours when they wake up or when you wake up. And that's just reality. But there are so many high-tech ways to get around, not having a phone number in the States or whatever. One thing that we do, I think most people probably know about, Apple iMessage. And so if you have an Apple device and you're texting somebody else who does, you can just do it from email address to their phone number. So you don't need to have
use an iOS, yes.
a US phone number. That's right. But we also have a Google Voice number that you can get for free. And so I have I have an American area code, that I maintain, and I can go, if someone doesn't have an iOS device, I can just go to google.com/voice and log in, and I can type in their phone number and send them a text. I can even make calls that way.
And I know you have to use a VPN because of where you're at, so you have to have some next level of encryption than what some people would know how to do. But you need to do that. To do your job, you need to have that for where you live in the world anyway. So that's just a little extra effort you have to put into it. But also, you're having to make calls and texts and things sometimes at times during the day that might not be normal for a lot of people. When do you do a lot of your phone calls?
Usually for me, the best time is in the morning, my time. So my kids might get out the door for school around 7:30 in the morning. And so that time, again, maybe I'm just getting out of bed, but that time is great. Back in my support base, typically it's about 6:30 p.m.
Yeah, early evening probably.
Early evening. You can also do it, right before going to bed. Either way. But yeah, you've got to get that VPN. And I've often heard a lot of people who don't want to get the good VPN, so they want to go on the cheap side and get the free VPNs, and they don't work as well. Ours costs $100 a year.
They're getting what they paid for, and you're getting what you paid for.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Any other hints or tips or anything else you would add on to that missions worker that loves God and loves people, and they're serving diligently, and they need to develop some more good habits? Any final good habits you would recommend?
Well, one more thing that I would talk about when it comes to being around the world. I think a lot of times we have in our minds this idea that, I can't raise any support from the States until the next time I'm going to be back. And I don't have a conference to be back, or a furlough or whatever it is for 3 more years. So I'm stuck here for 3 years. And so support may be going downhill, and it just, whatever happens, and we'll see where we land in 3 years. And that's when we can bolster that a little bit. I've got a coworker, and also I've experienced this a little bit myself, who bought a plane ticket from, I think this guy lived in Africa, went back to Texas for 10 days, left his wife and kids back in Africa, and he had, I don't even know the exact numbers, but probably 20 appointments in about an 8-day span. And I think he raised about $800 a month, plus I think well over $10,000 one time.
Wow.
So let's see, your plane ticket from Africa to Texas was probably about
maybe
$1,200, maybe $1,500. Let's give the benefit of the doubt there.
Maybe, yeah.
That's paid for easily in just 2 months. Was that worth it? I think so.
Yeah.
So if you can get permission, obviously, from your ministry supervisor to take the time away, pick the best time of the year that may not detract from your ministry, from your mission, I think that's a no-brainer. So, but oftentimes as I talk to workers overseas, they kind of think, and I sometimes myself even find myself thinking this way too, and I have to get over this and think, well, if I'm vision driven, I may need to spend money on that international plane ticket and get back in front of my supporters, reconnect with existing ones, perhaps ask for some increases, meet some new people, and just work like crazy for about 8 days and come right back.
Yeah. You don't have to wait until the entire family goes, and you also tack it in with a trip to grandma's house and visiting 7 churches and all that kind of stuff. Sometimes there might be a time for that kind of a short-term personal, hey, I'm going to go do it. Yeah, I've heard of some similar situations where people have done that, and I appreciate you saying that, because I've definitely heard of that working out well for people. And the flip side is, I've heard people that they try and do all their support raising with their family as their quote-unquote furlough or vacation or whatever else, and they're just exhausted, and they don't even raise that much because there's too much distraction.
Right. Yeah. I mean, what a difference. Imagine, doing that or not doing that, and then you go back for furlough, and you've got a limited time. You've got 3 months, but you've got this huge amount to raise. What if you've already raised that? You made a trip just yourself 3 months earlier, and yet now you're 100% funded. So you can go into that furlough and really take it to rest and recharge and be with family. And so, I think that's just a much healthier way to look at that. Yeah.
Well, my friend, I want to commend you. You're leading your ministry well, and you're leading your family well. I've been able to see that recently myself. And I believe that you're even doing your support raising portion of all that well. No one gets into ministry with the goal of raising support. That's more kind of comes with the territory. And yet you seem to have a real maturity with you about it and an understanding. And that's even in the little things that I'm seeing, such as the fact that I know your family is looking forward to a time soon when you guys are going to take a little rest, and you're not going back to States because that would be work. You're going somewhere not too far from here, but you're all going together and getting some R&R. And I've even heard your family kind of talking about that excitedly. So I just commend you for your perspective, and I'm thankful for the work that you're doing. And I know a lot of ministry partners as well, and so just appreciate you, and thanks for stepping on the SRS podcast with me today.
Thank you. It's been great to be here. We've had a great week, and looking forward to seeing what the Lord does here. So, thanks for your work.
My pleasure to help.
Yeah.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisengsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcasts from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.